That's right.
Welcome to The Know. I'm Ashley.
I'm Eric.
I'm John.
And the three of us were fortunate enough to see an early screening of Star Wars The Last Jedi. Very exciting stuff. It's not something that we've got to do too much before. Eric really opening some doors for us. Thanks, dude.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So what we
Anytime.
wanted to do is do not exactly a review, but a spoiler-free discussion, just because we each have various points of view. We like different kinds of movies, and so we can discuss, one, some of the fears that people have had going into this movie and whether those fears are founded, and then what we think of the movie in general terms. No spoilers. We'll do a spoiler cast later, separately, after the movie's out and everyone can see it. It would be very pointless to do a spoiler cast.
So by
now.
fears, you mean like, is it a scary movie? Like, are people gonna be scared?
Yeah, is this a horror film?
Is it did Ryan Johnson take it down the path like, you know what, we're gonna make the second one a horror film, or the eighth one?
Yeah, The Exorcist in space.
Yeah. You know,
The
because
porgs kill everyone.
turns
they
out
eat everything.
they're real scary.
Like piranhas. It was fantastic.
So,
Now
John,
I'm pissed off that's not actually in the movie.
that would be spectacular. Maybe that'll be one of the spin-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be in JJ's episode 9.
One of the porgs was actually Darth Plagueis, is what it was.
We said this wasn't going to be a spoiler cast.
All right, bringing it back on track. That did not take very long.
Sorry.
So, John, what kinds of movies do you typically like? Like, what's your general taste?
Jeez, I have a very eclectic taste. I like all the movies.
All the Transformers.
I've only seen the first two.
Of the Transformers
Of the
movies?
Transformers.
You're very lucky.
I kind of fell off, you know? I feel like I should catch up on those. No, I mean, I like very snobby movies. We were just talking a second ago about 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is a movie that a lot of people who are watching this go, I didn't know that was a movie. It just came out recently, starring Frances McDormand. That's a fantastic dialogue-driven, charismatic movie that I love. And I went and saw Shape of Water, and Shape of Water is a woman who has sex with a fish man. I like that movie as well. So there's like the range, you know?
Yeah. But would you prefer mainstream type movies, art house movies? Do you have like a genre that you particularly have a soft spot for?
Yeah, I mean, I like art house a little bit more. I probably skew more on like harsher on the more just let's just have fun movies. Like, no, I want really good story movies. I care about character and character arc. I care about pacing and structure and editing and that kind of thing. So it's not just like, oh, there were explosions or there were boobies and I'm good. It's like, that's Ashley. That's Ashley.
But only the boobies part, not the explosions. She hates explosions.
I've been at your house to watch Game of Thrones. I know how you react when the boobies come on.
Oh yeah.
So I probably skew a little bit more on like, I like my fun popcorn movies, but I like them to be good and not just pandering. So I don't really like to be pandered in movies.
Yeah. How about you, Eric? What's your taste in movies?
I am much like John. I have an eclectic taste in films, but I was a kid of the 80s, so like the Spielberg event movies are definitely the things that I hold the closest to my heart.
I was just realizing, so your favorite movie of all time is Jaws.
It is Jaws, yeah.
My favorite movie of all time is Hook.
Oh, really?
Don't do that way. It's just a fantastic movie. But I thought that was fun that we both have Spielberg films.
Sure,
okay?
yeah, no. It's fine. It's fine.
It's just the best movie of all time to me.
I wouldn't agree with that. But
nobody has ever agreed with that on me, and I'm aware of it.
But I love Temple of Doom, so there's a lot of people that really don't.
That is
so
not the favorite of the trilogy.
And it's probably my favorite. I think Raiders is a better movie. You can't.
That's what I mean. I'm not
really
saying that Hook is the best movie of all time for everybody. I think it's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Jaws is the best movie of all time either, but I'm sure I've just ruined our relationship by saying that.
No, it's fine.
Actually,
we'll talk about it later.
Well, my favorite movie is Spaceballs.
This is the last movie. This is the last movie I ever get to see early, isn't it? That's what.
That's done. Okay. Sorry,
you're
Star
out.
Wars.
No, but I like a lot of the mainstream movies. I like action. I like crazy set pieces. I like weird sci-fi. I loved Valerian. I mean, I could have taken the characters out of it, but I like the world and I like the spectacle.
You like the world building. You like
Oh, Valerian was beautiful.
Yeah, so I like crazy, cool worlds that just take me somewhere else and that are really like beautiful and fun. Also, yes, I love boobs and explosions in my film. So though, like if you have a really big explosion and a pair of boobs, I'm probably gonna give it 10 out of 10. I'm basic. But I wanted to discuss that just so people have an idea what sorts of movie watchers we each are, just because everyone's got a different perspective, and that means that people can pay attention to each of us differently depending on how closely tastes align.
Let's talk about Star Wars.
Let's talk about Star Wars.
Well, it's actually really fun because we haven't talked to each other, or you guys have spoken to each other.
We spoke a little bit afterwards,
but I went to the premiere and I haven't talked to you guys since. I didn't get here for the press screening, so for all I know, we could have wildly different opinions on this movie.
Possibly. I will say overall, I was a little bit worried going into this movie that that I'd been spoiled too much by some of the trailers.
Yeah.
There was that I think it was the second trailer where people were watching it saying, "Oh God, it's very spoilery," and even Ryan Johnson tweeted out, "If you want to go in clean, don't watch this trailer." So I was worried that I already knew too much of what was going to happen and it wouldn't be a cool surprise. And I felt very wrong about that. I felt like a lot of those expectations were set up and then turned nicely. So it was really cool to go into that thinking I knew things and then be completely surprised by what actually eventuated.
Yeah, the movie's like it's like the forefront of its mind. This movie is all about subverting expectation.
Yeah,
like,
it constantly is like setting you up to expect a certain thing. It's driving you in a direction, and then it takes a left turn, goes somewhere else. But it's not disappointing somewhere else.
Sure, no, a character will start off as something. Like there's a new kind of Han Solo-ish character, but Ron Howard. I was thinking Ron Howard.
Ron
Han
Johnson.
Solo. Ron Johnson, Ryan's brother and second unit director. No, Ryan very much knows that you see this character, and I'm going to be vague just in case that this is even a spoiler. But there's a new character, and he knows that when you see him, you go, "Oh, that's a Han Solo type."
Yeah,
and so he doesn't make the mistake of following that character trope beat by beat. He does that for plot structure. He does that through character. He does that through writing.
He does that with actually even some of the main characters. Like
for sure,
he takes like Poe and Finn and even Luke down unfamiliar paths and character like exploration, and again subverts your expectations of what they would do, how they would react. But nothing feels completely out of line and out of like wrong for these characters. It all makes sense, but it's getting to explore new avenues of these characters that we haven't got to explore in previous films.
Well, yeah, there are a couple of subplots. Well, one subplot in particular that I felt didn't get enough development, so it's sort of like its big moment at the end was less impactful than it could have been.
Is it a relationship you're talking about?
Yeah,
okay,
but there's but there was just so much else to do that I felt was very well developed. I can forgive it that. It's not flawless.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things where I was like, this seemed like this one moment seemed a little too convenient or something. But for the most part, I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I didn't know about the movie.
I think it's a good word. It's the movie manages to surprise you multiple times, which is pretty cool considering how extensive the marketing is and how much of this world we're familiar with. But it multiple times does a kind of does something and then takes it back or changes it to what you thought was happening multiple times, where it's kind of kept the movie fresh and fun the whole time.
Sure. And even some of the weaker aspects, like I've seen a lot of criticism about the middle chunk of the movie being a little slower. And I've actually had to make the argument that that's kind of one of the most important chunks of the movie. It's not my favorite part of the movie, but there's an underlying message to this whole thing, which again I can't say without going into spoiler
Save it
territory.
For the spoiler cast.
But this chunk is crucial for it, and even going to the very last image you see in the movie, it all builds to that thing that we see. Like it's so hard to dance around all this stuff.
I think something probably a lot of people want to know is if there's criticisms that were made for Force Awakens, and
that it was it felt like a lot of people. To a lot of people, that it was a rehash of A New Hope, that it was too many beats of a movie they'd already seen, and so the worry was that this film would be too many beats from Empire Strikes Back, and that they're just trying to recreate the original trilogy. That was, I think, one of the big concerns about from a lot of people going into this movie.
Yeah, and whether that's like a criticism you agree with, and for the record, I don't agree with that criticism. This one doesn't. It's more like Rian Johnson took kind of themes from Star Wars and then introduced those themes in certain parts of the movie, but made his own story and his own movie. I found out after the movie that Ryan wasn't even handed a story structure he had to follow, because he's got writing credit on the film, and that I'm sure he still worked extensively with Kathleen Kennedy and JJ and a team, approving what he was going to do with these characters. But you could tell very much that Ryan wanted to make his own movie and make his own story and still pay homage to Star Wars of prior, but did not do what some people criticize Force Awakens did.
My understanding is they were pretty hands off, that they pretty much just said, here's JJ's script, here's the stuff that, that he's been shooting. Go with God. Go do your thing.
I think it shows.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
one of those times that I love it when you can go to a movie, and we were just talking about Denis Villeneuve, where you can go to a movie and you can tell that there was a resounding voice throughout the whole film that carried the film. Obviously, films are made by crews of people doing all this work, but when there's a single voice kind of keeping things on rails, you can feel it. And Rian Johnson, I think, is turning into one of those directors that I would have to say, when he's given an opportunity, succeeds in doing it. And Last Jedi feels very smooth and cohesive and has a message it wanted to tell, and it did it.
And there's, for those who haven't seen it, we actually do have an interview that Eric did with Star Wars director Rian Johnson on the website. So you should absolutely check that out. He goes into more detail about how he approached directing and more about writing it out and how that process and working with Disney and Lucasfilm fell out for him and his crew in getting the movie across the line. That's also spoiler free, because that was it was done before the premiere, so they couldn't talk about it. You hadn't seen it, but it's a really cool look into how The Last Jedi got from its roots, like from the beginning process to where it is.
Last Jedi felt like a film that in an environment right now where we've got some of these big budget films and these tentpole productions that are let's say, from lack of a better way of putting it, feel rushed and or fixed or scattered. Like he did Looper like 5 years ago and then hasn't done anything since. So maybe it's a good idea if we don't just like rush these directors into these movies so we don't get these not thought out films.
Yeah, or movies made by committee, which this one is definitely a singular voice. You compare Last Jedi to Justice League, for example.
That's not.
but I mean, like one you can clearly see whether you love it or hate it. It is clearly because he makes some big choices here.
Yeah.
There's stuff.
There are ramifications for the entire Star Wars universe that come out of this movie.
This isn't a filler movie at all. This isn't just about gathering a team or whatever. And Justice League feels like a filler movie. It feels like a stepping stone. It feels like idea from Executive A meeting idea from Executive B, meeting Zack Snyder, meeting Joss Whedon, and like all these things just like circling. It feel cohesive.
It felt like a giant prologue to a movie we haven't seen yet, is what Justice League felt like.
But this movie feels like a movie.
It does, and it has a real deal threat. I mean, when I don't think it's a spoiler to say Snoke is actually in the movie, and we finally see him when he's not a hologram. In the time that we see him, he actually you see his power.
Yeah,
you see why he's the leader of this. You see it, and he just does so much with without being showy about it.
Yeah.
And it's just the whole movie's filled with smart writing. I think Ryan said early on, and when you watch the movie, it's so clear that he sat down and said, I wanted to make every single one of the characters that I'm writing face their greatest challenge.
Yeah.
And their greatest fears. And that goes for everybody from, Luke, Leia, Finn, Poe.
It is darker than Force Awakens.
Which is expected.
Everyone's in trouble the entire movie. Like, everyone's dealing with shit the entire movie.
Well, and that's something you brought up about people worried that it copied Empire. And the only thing it really takes from Empire again, with being very vague about it, is a structure thing, and how Empire's structure was essentially a chase movie.
Yeah.
And so is this for one of the main stories.
Yeah, to some degree.
It's
and
not
it's
the only thing that's
also
happening.
Yes.
that Empire was the darkest film of the original trilogy. And this, I would say, is definitely a more serious, darker tone than Force Awakens was. But it's also not... it doesn't weigh you down.
It's got some great levity in there.
Great levity. Not to the point of being a comedy by any means.
There's an opening interaction between Poe and General Hux
This sets up the movie,
just
really.
fantastic. It's just wonderful. It starts off the movie on a great note.
Well, and you know, and I've seen people criticize that moment too as being too modern.
But they criticize that as well in the first movie, that these new movies are being too modern. But I'm like, they're being made now.
But I would counter that. It's a scene over an intercom, and so they're talking to each other, and it very much reminds me a lot of from the first Star Wars, whenever Han Solo's talking in the trash, you're in the detention block.
That's exactly what I thought.
It's like a nice
boring
nod.
conversation anyway. You know, it's like it's always been part of the universe. It's just now people are more sensitive about it because of the prequels, I think. So.
Yeah, the prequels set a different tone, but if you go watch the originals, they're bumbling. They're not very good at their heistiness and rescuing. Like even like Leia is rescued by these 3 idiots when she thought like an entire army was going to come and save her, and they're like in stormtrooper outfits and everything, and she's throwing like jabs at Han the entire time. Like,
and she has to take lead because they don't know really what the hell they're doing. Yeah.
It's absurd. I mean, Han literally shoots the console at one point and has that weird. You know, it's like it definitely feels in line. It's just, again, the prequels changed the tone of what George was trying to do with this thing, and these new ones are like, let's not do that again.
That's an interesting question. George Lucas went to the premiere of The Force Awakens. He didn't go to this one. Do you think that, like, what you know of George Lucas, do you think he would like this movie?
I don't know, because I feel like he's a little, like, he went to Force Awakens, and if I recall, he wasn't like a huge fan of Force Awakens.
He was a huge fan of the $4 billion in his back pocket. That was about it. Yeah.
I think he's probably, I mean, if I'm gonna put myself in his shoes, I'd be sad with what this has become to a certain extent, because he had a certain amount of input and control in the original 3. He took full control of the prequel, and the prequels turned out the way they are and got the reaction the way they are and the reputation. And then now Force Awakens came out and everyone was pretty much generally in love with it. I think Last Jedi is gonna be another one people are gonna go crazy about. And so this thing that he created that did not turn out so well when he took full control of it is now being back on the rails, so I would be upset.
Yeah, it's kind of being forgotten.
Yeah.
There is one mention in this movie that kind of ties it to, you know, not doesn't tie it to the prequel trilogy, but there is one mention of a name that is not brought up in the original trilogy, but it is all over the prequel trilogy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that after.
Yes.
But there are moments where it's kind of like almost like Ryan sets up a moment where they have to talk about something or something is about to happen, and as the director or as the entire crew, they either could go the prequel route or go the original route, and they keep going the original route of how they talk about stuff and how they represent stuff, and even how characters show up and that kind of thing. So it's very much like, you know, I think they're staying with the line of like, let's not talk about the prequels, let's just continue with these.
Yeah. Speaking of characters as well, one of the things that a lot of people criticized Force Awakens for, those that did, that is that they felt like Rey didn't have a reason for being where she was or doing what she was doing, and that she felt like a Mary Sue, just a plot device to take everyone else.
People called Rey a Mary Sue. I never heard that before.
Yeah, it's come up a little bit, but
those people are totally full of shit.
But
I agree.
Totally full of shit.
If there's anything that this movie does, I think it's to address why a bunch of characters are doing what they're doing, exposing what it is that drives them.
Especially Rey.
Yeah, you know, paying off a lot of those different, very character-driven storylines.
This movie, I think, makes Force Awakens a better movie.
That's probably a good way to put it.
Because, and I will say a couple of characters. I won't say why, but Kylo Ren in this movie is,
I agree,
so much more fleshed out. You understand his headspace a lot more.
He doesn't just seem like
a petulant kid.
The emo nephew. He actually, like, he's got his own driving forces, and they're very interesting.
Yeah, and complex. And I mean, he's a complex character, and I understand why people felt the emo, vibe off of him in the first one. But I've always liked that they.
And don't get me wrong. He is. He's got that, like, he's got a lot of that heavy type. Internal angst. Yeah, he's a broody type. Great. Totally. He'd be, great as a musician. But
I love it because that means he's not just Vader. Like, he wants to be Vader. He wants that, but there's a struggle in him that wasn't in Vader when he fully turned. And to me, that's what makes an interesting character, because he's fighting the light.
Yeah.
And he still, in some degrees, especially at the beginning of this movie, still has that struggle.
Yeah.
And it's and he makes choices that you don't expect him to make, and it's such a great solidifying of the character in this one. To me, he fully forms here.
Yeah. There's some great interactions with him and Snoke that really peels back multiple layers of where his character is.
Yeah, and again, it goes against expectation. It's not the kind of interactions you would think going into it.
And it's not just him either. I feel like Rey is much more fleshed out this time around. She's driving herself forward. I think that the development we get with Luke's storyline is really great. I feel like we get more out of Poe, we get more out of Finn. Like, all these main characters that they've set up to drive this trilogy forward really build on what The Force Awakens started. And I feel like they come into their own in this movie. I feel like this was very character driven, and that's what made what is a 150-minute movie not feel like it was dragging on and on and on.
It was also pretty. I like how they kept going with the practicals.
It was really pretty.
Yeah.
It had plenty of explosions, 10 out of 10.
A lot of explosions.
Lots of big explosions.
No boobs. Well, unless there's an alien that got
there's
milked.
4 boobs. There's at least 4 boobs in the movie.
There's a chest.
It was cool, though, and this is something that I think Rian Johnson's talked about before, but that the new aliens that are introduced, the new types of aliens, all are introduced for, there's a purpose there. They each do something. They're not just something in the background that's never explained. Yeah. Each one of them does something in the movie.
But the world feels lived in, again, not to rehash old things that have been said about the prequels, but big thing I hate about the prequels was everything felt vast and empty and open and fake, because it was. Whereas this all feels solid, lived in, and real, because often it is. A lot of even the alien characters remain, makeup and prosthetic kind of stuff. And there's obviously tons of visual effects in this film. There's one shot I wish we could talk about. There's one shot of this film that happens in space.
Spoiler cast.
That's one of the greatest shots, I think, from Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
But, and that's completely visual effects, but there are some other moments where, the creatures are just so, I want to, meet those creatures. I want to go say hi.
So if you, do you have any final thoughts?
Go see this movie, see it big, see it loud.
So if you have to make a choice, watch, wait, or skip this movie, you're saying watch it right now.
And watch it with the biggest audience that you can that hasn't seen it. So you want to brave the theater for this one, because you want to see it early. You want to see it with a crowd that's going to react, because there's some real good oh shit moments.
Yeah, and I feel like the crowd enthusiasm does play into it. There's a lot of those moments of levity where you feel just you can take a load off, and you hear other people having a bit of a laugh or a sigh of relief as well. It really adds to it.
Or shock.
Or shock
moments.
Yeah, that as well. I would absolutely go and watch it again right now.
I'm going to see it on Thursday.
Yep, me too.
All right,
and then Friday.
So we like Star Wars The Last Jedi. If that gives you a better indication of whether you want to check it out immediately, wait for a bit, wait for DVD, or when it comes to a streaming service or whatever. If you're planning on skipping entirely, let us know in the comments. We will absolutely do a spoiler cast of this once it's out properly and more people have been able to see it.
It's going to be all about the porgs.
All about the porgs.
There's so much to talk about, spoiler-wise.
Darth Porgius. But if you find this helpful, please absolutely let us know in the comments. And if you want to see more about Star Wars, check out the interview with Rian Johnson. It's on the website, theno.tv. Great interview. Rian Johnson seems like a real cool dude. And if you're new to this channel, if you're just finding us, please subscribe. And we're going to talk more about Star Wars coming up.
Let the past die. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
Darkness rises, and light to meet